New York, my New York. When the sharp, cold air of Manhattan hits my lungs at 6 a.m., I feel like an athlete, ready, focused, and chasing the prize. This is the strange energy Wall Street instills in me. The thrill of a marathon where everyone starts one step behind. I am 35 years old. I hold the title of Vice President of Legal Affairs at the bank. It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Having my own corner office on the 45th floor of one of New York's biggest buildings. When I look out the window, the Statue of Liberty is a miniature toy, swallowed by the city's roar. This is the view I sacrificed the last 10 years of my life to secure. But stories usually talk about what was lost, not what was gained. And my story is exactly that, a ledger of losses. I grew up in one of those old brownstone buildings in Brooklyn, with circular fire escape staircases. My parents, Irish descent, hard-working people who struggled to make ends meet. My father worked long hours at the dockyard. The scent of salt water and heavy machine oil on his clothes was to me the smell of sacrifice. My mother worked in a hospital laundry room. Her hands were cracked and calloused from the detergent and hot water. Their life was built on survival. My life, I decided, had to be built on climbing. This was my silent promise to them, a guarantee that their hard labor would not be in vain. In school, I was obsessed with my grades, while other kids played baseball in Central Park or talked about their first dates. I was calculating how to secure a scholarship for law school, researching which committees offered support. Back then, every achievement was an escape from the noisy streets of Brooklyn, from my father's dockyard scent, from the silent exhaustion on my mother's shoulders. I didn't want to inherit that weariness. When I entered law school, I was practically the only person from my background. Others talked about their father's companies, their summer homes in the Hamptons. Their life seemed like an inherited privilege. Mine was a battlefield, something I had to claw my way into. I stayed quiet, listened, took notes, and simply worked harder than anyone else. To me, success wasn't a luxury. It was the only path to survival. In my third year, James walked into my life. James was my complete opposite. He was the embodiment of ease, joy, and unwavering optimism. He came from a wealthy family, but was devoid of the cold arrogance that money often brings. He was into sailing and poetry. I was interested only in cold, logical statutes and corporate finance. The first time James saw me, I was in the library, dark circles under my eyes, trying to solve a complex case in my head. He looked at me, mimicking my intense expression, and asked, "Why are you always in battle stance? Is someone attacking you?" I laughed. That laugh was a strained, nervous sound I had held in my throat for years. "Because I am at war," I told him. "And this is enemy territory." From that moment on, James began to infiltrate my rigid defenses, my high walls. He became my rest stop on the concrete bridge leading to Manhattan. When I spent time with him, for the first time, I felt the immense weight on my shoulders lessen. Amidst the complex chaos of New York, just sharing a cheap coffee with him in a modest cafe brought a kind of peace that I didn't feel I deserved. While I was constantly planning the future, he was teaching me how to exist in the now. We got engaged a year later. A simple ring, a small diamond inherited from his grandmother, but invaluable to me. He proposed on a sailboat during sunset over the Hudson River. I felt like I had won the biggest case of my life. He wasn't just the love of my life. He was the only person who showed me that normal life was possible without constant struggle. Getting married to him was a promise, a vow that one day, when everything settled down, I would find peace with him. Law school ended, and my turning point arrived. The job offer from that famous, enormous law firm on Wall Street, multi-million-dollar cases, an international environment, the pinnacle of a legal career. The figures were dizzying. James popped champagne to celebrate the moment, but he must have seen the expression on my face. I was as tense and determined as I was happy. That medal felt like a shackle. "Evelyn," he said, cupping my cheek. "Remember, this is just a job. We'll make money, then we'll get married. This is our life." "No, James," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "This is my ticket to change my life. This is the vehicle that will lift the heavy weight off my parents' backs. This is the return on their sacrifices. This is everything." It was right there, at that moment, that the first crack appeared between us. He wanted life to be a joyful adventure. I was still convinced that life was an ongoing battle that hadn't been won yet. My first few years passed like a ghost's. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. Stay in the office on the then 20th floor until 1 a.m. Sleep was a luxury. Eating was a necessity, usually a cold, unappetizing sandwich at my desk. Social life. I could sometimes reply to James's texts the next morning. My replies were short, tired, and robotic. James was understanding at first. He would bring me my favorite pastries from that old Brooklyn bakery, sit by the office door, and try to catch a glimpse of me for a few minutes. "1 hour, Evelyn. Just 1 hour, then you can go back." At the time, I didn't realize how unfair I was being, how cruel it was to deny him even that 1 hour, because in my mind, success required an inevitable sacrifice. And that sacrifice was my personal life. It was my fiancé's birthday, a Saturday, outside, the most beautiful autumn weather in New York. Yellow and red leaves were falling gracefully onto the pavement, like they had been painted by an artist's brush. James had arranged a small, romantic weekend getaway to Vermont, a cozy cabin with a fireplace. I remember the night I gave him back the engagement ring, as the coldest winter night of my life. The lights of Manhattan shone brightly, but there was an Arctic chill inside me. "I want to be with you, James. I really do, but not now. I need to solidify this career first. I need that title first. I need to be financially secure. Then I will drop everything and come to you. I promise. Just a few more years." James smiled. That smile was not joyful. It was sad, tired, and accepting. "Evelyn, you are always living for later. The present moment, for us, never existed. I don't want to live perpetually in a postponement. I want to love and be loved now. And you, right now, are not ready for that." He placed the ring in my palm. The cold metal searched for the warmth of his body as he walked away from me. After he left, I went back to the office. The next day, I won the big case that everyone admired. My partner patted my back in congratulation. I was successful. But sitting alone in that massive office on the 45th floor, I realized that everything I had gained wouldn't bring back the James I had lost. This was my first great cold victory. Over the next 7 years, titles, paychecks, and awards accumulated. A high-rise apartment with a panoramic view, Italian designer furniture, expensive wardrobes updated every season. But the echo in the apartment, the feeling of emptiness, grew larger every day. Success hadn't brought the peace I expected. It had only brought a bigger loneliness, in a bigger apartment, on a higher floor. Now I am 35. I am one of the bank's youngest vice presidents. I achieved it. My father's pride, the sparkle in my mother's eyes. I provided it all. But now, at the pinnacle of that great achievement, when I look around, all I see is solitude. I check my phone contact list. Colleagues, clients, but no one to truly listen to my heart. One night, unable to sleep, I find James's old number on my phone. I call. It rings, and there is no answer. A few days later, I send him a short, tentative email. "Just wanted to see how you are. Evelyn." His reply came a week later, hitting me like a sledgehammer that split my life in two. It was brief, formal, and distant, like a business correspondence. "I'm well, Evelyn. Thank you. My wife and I just found out we are expecting a baby girl next week. I hope you are well too. Best of luck." In that moment, in that 45th floor office, At the peak of that multi-million-dollar career, I finally understood that every moment I had stolen from time had irreparably shattered my life. The few years I had postponed meant a brand new life, a family for James. While I was waiting for that later life, he had been living now. It is exactly at this point, in the middle of this grand success, that the most important case of my life began. The case to win back my own life. This case is not being heard in courtrooms, but in the silence of my luxurious, yet icy cold, Manhattan apartment. But that Thursday night, a critical merger file landed on my desk. I had to stay at the office, sleepless and tense, for the entire weekend. It was past midnight. I stared at the coffee stain on my desk, reflecting on how stained my own life had become. I picked up my phone and sent him a brief, guilt-ridden message. I can't make it again. I have to cancel. This is truly important. I'm sorry. His reply was so simple, it broke my heart. This isn't a job anymore, Evelyn. This is an addiction. And you chose it over me. Again, I am tired of always coming second. In that instant, I knew how accurate those words were. My ambition was no longer just a goal. It had morphed into an uncontrollable addiction. Success was my drug, and James's loving presence, my attempt at a healthy life, was the biggest obstacle in the path of my growing dependence. He was my attempt at sanity, but I was pushing him away. The email from James landed like an eviction notice for my future. It wasn't the content itself that broke me. I knew he had moved on, but the cold finality of the word wife, and the knowledge that, while I was celebrating a corporate title, he was celebrating the beginning of a life I had traded for a corner office. The ice in my expensive Manhattan apartment wasn't the air conditioning. It was the chilling realization of utter, irreversible failure in the one area that truly mattered. I didn't cry. People like me, who climb corporate ladders in finance, rarely have time for tears. We convert sadness into strategy and pain into performance reviews. Instead, I did what any high-powered attorney does when facing a crisis. I analyzed the damage. The diagnosis was clear: burnout, severe isolation, and a profound identity crisis. For years, I had defined myself by the hours I billed, the complexity of the contracts I closed, and the number on my paycheck. Without that daily frantic chase, who was Evelyn Reed? I didn't know. The only thing I was certain of was that the woman who had achieved so much on the 45th floor was utterly empty. The change in my routine was subtle at first, noticeable only to those who looked closely. My expensive black and grey power suits felt heavier. The perfect sculpted bun of my hair felt like a helmet, trapping my thoughts. I started taking longer to reply to emails. 5 minutes became 20. 20 minutes became an hour. My colleagues, people who existed only to compete with me, didn't notice my inner collapse. They saw a momentary dip in my efficiency, a weakness to exploit. My boss, Michael, a man whose face was permanently set in a look of mild irritation, called me into his office, not the one on the 45th floor, but the real one, the partner's room on the 55th. Evelyn, he said, not looking up from his legal pad. The air conditioning in his office always seemed to be set to Antarctica. You missed the deadline for the preliminary review on the Bristol acquisition. You missed a deadline. He let the silence hang, a heavy, judgmental shroud. I apologize, Michael. I paused, searching for a corporate excuse. Sick? No, that sounds weak. Too busy? No, that implies incompetence. I've been reevaluating my strategic focus. Michael finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were cold, calculating. Your strategic focus, Evelyn, is to make this bank money. You've been the best, the most ruthless, the one who understood that personal life is a tax on productivity. Don't let your personal life, whatever sad little drama it might involve, start taxing my bank. I left his office with a burning slow-motion rage. He was right. He had defined the rules, and I had played the game perfectly. But hearing him dismiss my entire existence outside the office as a sad little drama, it was the final insult. My ambition, my drive, was born from a desire to escape that kind of dismissive judgment, only to find myself drowning in it at the very top. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't go back to work either. I walked. Manhattan is a symphony of noise and light, but when you are truly lost, it's just overwhelming static. I walked aimlessly until I found myself in a different kind of neighborhood. Less polished, more vibrant. The West Village. I stumbled into a place called the Crimson Quill. Not a bar, not a cafe, but a dusty bookstore filled with old volumes, the air smelling sweetly of aged paper and espresso. It was the antithesis of the bank's sterile glass environment. I sat in a corner, nursing a bitter espresso, scrolling through articles about work-life balance. An impossible concept in my world. That's when I saw him. He was sitting across the room, hunched over a heavy leather-bound journal, sketching. He wore a simple, worn leather jacket and dark jeans, completely oblivious to the world around him. His hair was longish, dark, and slightly messy, giving him an artistic, yet intense look. He looked like an exhibit from a forgotten time, a time when people actually created things, instead of just trading them. He looked up suddenly, catching my gaze. I quickly looked away, my cheeks heating up. Corporate Evelyn never blushed. But this wasn't the corporate world. He stood up, walked over to my table, and placed a small wrinkled piece of paper next to my saucer. He didn't speak a word. He just offered a slight, almost imperceptible smile, and went back to his table. My heart was doing a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. I slowly unfolded the paper. On it was a sketch, a quick impressionistic drawing of me. Not the perfectly dressed VP, but the tired woman in the corner, holding a cup of espresso like it was a life raft. And under the sketch, in beautiful fluid handwriting, were 4 words. "You look like silence." That single sentence shattered my composure. More than James's email or Michael's reprimand, silence. In a city defined by noise, he saw my silence. I looked up, ready to speak, to thank him, to ask him why. But he was gone. Only the scent of ink and old leather remained in his place. That encounter became my new obsession. It was an anomaly in my perfectly ordered, predictable life. A glitch in the system. I, Evelyn Reed, who dealt with hundreds of complex variables daily, was suddenly fixated on one, the sketch artist. I went back to the Crimson Quill the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, I sat in the same corner, ordering the same bitter espresso, wearing different disguises. Sometimes I wore my corporate armor. Sometimes I tried to look casual, which for me meant a designer sweater that cost more than his entire wardrobe. On the 4th day, he was there. Same corner, same leather-bound journal. I felt a nervous excitement I hadn't experienced since I took the bar exam. This time, I didn't wait for him to approach. I walked over to his table. Corporate Evelyn was back in command, masked by a facade of calm confidence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice crisp and professional. He looked up. His eyes were a startling deep green, the color of moss after rain. They held a kind of gentle curiosity that melted my corporate freeze. "You're the one who left the drawing," I stated, not asked. He gave that slight, enigmatic smile again. "And you're the one who noticed." His voice was low, gravelly, completely unhurried. Another stark contrast to the rapid, clipped speech of Manhattan executives. "I need to understand what you meant," I pressed. "You said I looked like silence." "That's not a compliment." He closed his journal slowly, deliberately. "In a city that screams, silence is the loudest form of truth, isn't it?" You looked like someone who had silenced everything inside to hear one very important voice, the voice of ambition. But that voice, Evelyn, is a very poor conversationalist. He knew my name. My blood ran cold, then hot. How do you know my name? He didn't flinch. He just tapped the cover of his journal. I see a lot of people in this city. You were wearing a name tag pin on your suit lapel the first night. E. Reed, VP, Legal. You might erase the person, but the title always stays, doesn't it? His insight was unnerving. He saw the title, but he looked past it. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not judged. He introduced himself as Gabriel. No last name, just Gabriel. He was an illustrator for niche graphic novels, working out of a small, barely heated studio nearby. He was everything I had run away from: uncertainty, artistic poverty, lack of structure, and yet I couldn't pull myself away. My life split into two distinct, parallel realities. Reality 1. Evelyn Reed, VP, the 45th floor. Negotiations, mergers, acquisitions, sleepless nights, translating billions of dollars into legal jargon. The sharp angles, the polished marble, the constant low hum of corporate power. Reality 2. Evelyn and Gabriel. The West Village. Dust, ink, old books, conversations that lasted hours. Not about contracts, but about the true meaning of success. About art, about lost dreams. He showed me the city I had forgotten. The hidden parks, the tiny jazz clubs, the street performers. He saw the world in colors and textures. I saw it in black and white clauses. I started canceling meetings. Small ones at first. A lunch here, a conference call there. I found myself lying to my assistant, Sarah. A severe breach of my own code. Tell them I'm in a critical client meeting. The critical client meeting was me sitting in Gabriel's tiny, cluttered studio, watching him draw, feeling the quiet warmth of a cheap radiator. Gabriel never asked about my job. He only ever asked about me. What did Evelyn want when she was 10? He asked one afternoon, tracing a line on his pad. Before the suits and the titles, I had to genuinely stop and think. 10-year-old Evelyn wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to live in a house with a huge garden and bake cookies. The simple domestic life I had scorned as a tax on productivity. My relationship with Gabriel was intoxicating precisely because it had no future. He was poor, structureless, and didn't fit into my carefully curated life. But that lack of pressure, the freedom from James's expectations of marriage and stability, was a balm to my raw, wounded soul. He wasn't a replacement for James. He was an escape hatch from Evelyn Reed. But every escape hatch leads somewhere. And Gabriel, with his deep green eyes and unnerving insight, was slowly leading me down a path that would soon collide violently with the concrete reality of the 45th floor. My professional mask was beginning to crack, and the real Evelyn, tired and desperate for connection, was ready to make a catastrophic mistake. The silence he had seen in me was now about to break into a very loud, very public sound. The dual life I was living, Evelyn the ruthless VP and Evelyn the silent observer with Gabriel, was utterly exhausting. It was a high-wire act with no safety net, and the higher I climbed at the bank, the more precarious the balance became. The scent of old paper and ink from Gabriel's studio was warring with the sterile metallic smell of my office tower, and the ink was starting to win. I began to resent the alarm clock, the polished shoes, the very structure that had once been my salvation. I was falling in love with the unstructured, unplanned chaos of Gabriel's life, a life where success was measured not in quarterly returns, but in the perfection of a single line drawn on paper. The collision started not with a bang, but with a series of professional whispers. My team noticed my distraction. I, the woman who never missed a detail, started overlooking crucial clauses in multi-million-dollar contracts. I was physically present in the boardroom, but my mind was perpetually wandering to a small, dusty cafe, wondering if Gabriel would be there and what observation he would share about the rain falling on the West Village sidewalk. One Tuesday morning, I sat in a high-stakes meeting with the CEO of a major acquiring firm. My job was to deliver a precise, legally airtight summary of our bank's position. I had done this 100 times. It was routine, but as I opened my mouth to speak, the perfectly articulated corporate jargon I needed, the indemnification clause, the fiduciary responsibility, the divestiture protocol, it all just dissolved into meaningless noise. Instead, I saw Gabriel's face and remembered a conversation we'd had the night before about the beauty of a perfect silence in a piece of music. I stumbled. I used the wrong legal term. I mixed up the timeline of the agreement. The silence that followed wasn't the beautiful silence Gabriel spoke of. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of professional humiliation. The CEO, a large intimidating man named Mr. Henderson, simply raised an eyebrow. Michael, my boss, cleared his throat. A sound that, in our world, was louder than a gunshot. Evelyn, Michael interjected, his voice dripping with forced politeness. Perhaps you should let James. He gestured to a junior male colleague named James, ironically. Take over the specifics of the protocol. You can focus on the broader strategic outlook. Broader strategic outlook. That was corporate code for, you are currently too unreliable to handle details. Stand back. I was mortified. The ground I had spent 10 years carving out for myself had just crumbled beneath my feet. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my corner office, staring at the panoramic view that suddenly felt like the bars of my cage. The view was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't worth the price of my dignity. I needed Gabriel. He was my antidote, my quick fix for the pain of failure. That evening, I drove straight to his studio. The tiny space was warm, cluttered, and alive with creativity, the antithesis of the 45th floor. I sank onto his dilapidated couch, and for the first time since that email from the other James, I let the raw, ugly truth spill out. I told him everything. The exhaustion, the pressure, the fear of failing my immigrant parents, the regret over the life I sacrificed. I even told him about James, the first James, and the baby. Gabriel listened. He didn't offer advice, didn't judge, and didn't interrupt with corporate platitudes. He just sat on the floor, gently sharpening a pencil, letting my words fill the space. When I finally finished, exhausted and raw, he looked at me with those moss-green eyes. You know, Evelyn, he said softly, that firm didn't hire you for your humanity. They hired you for your weaponry. When you stop wanting to fight, the weapon breaks. You've stopped wanting to fight, haven't you? His simple honesty was devastating. I hadn't just stopped fighting. I desperately wanted to surrender. I can't go back there, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I can't, but if I quit, I lose everything. The money, the status, the reason I sacrificed James. Gabriel placed his pencil down and stood up. He walked over to a stack of canvases. The status is a phantom, Evelyn. The money is just numbers on a screen. Your worth is not defined by how much you take from the world, but by what you give back. Then he did something that utterly solidified my irrational fixation on him. He picked up one of his canvases, a vibrant, chaotic, abstract piece, and handed me a small box of matches. Burn it, he said. Burn a piece of value you created. Feel the freedom of destruction. Sometimes, the only way to build a new road is to completely destroy the old one. It was a reckless, absurd request. But the feeling of that worn matchbox in my hand, the knowledge that I could actually destroy something of value and walk away unscathed, was electrifying. I lit the match. I watched the corner of his abstract painting, a piece he had worked on for months, curl, then blacken. then burst into orange flame. The smell of burning canvas, mixed with the smell of ink, was intoxicating. It felt like cleansing. In that moment, I knew I had to choose my corporate life, my history, or this reckless, uncertain freedom with Gabriel. The next morning, I walked into the bank and resigned. It wasn't a well-thought-out 2-week notice resignation. It was a declaration of war against my own past. I walked into Michael's office, the Antarctic air hitting me, and simply said, "I quit." Effective immediately, Michael's calculated composure finally broke. "You quit, Evelyn. You don't quit this job. You either become a partner or you fail trying." "What is this? Some kind of nervous breakdown?" "It's a strategic focus change, Michael," I said, repeating his dismissive words back to him. I left my badge on his mahogany desk and walked out of the 45th floor for the last time. The relief was instantaneous, a gigantic physical weight lifting off my chest. The first few weeks with Gabriel were pure, unadulterated bliss. No alarms, no suits. I spent my days in bookstores, art galleries, and small coffee shops. I learned to draw, badly, and to see the world with Gabriel's eyes. I finally tasted the now that James had always talked about. But bliss is a fragile thing, especially when built on an illusion. The reality of Gabriel's world began to set in. His studio was not quaint. It was financially unstable. His artistic freedom was often financial desperation. He was charming, insightful, and profoundly talented, but he had no plan, no structure, and frankly, no money. I started covering the bills, the rent for his studio, the expensive art supplies, the dinners, my substantial savings. The life raft I had built started to dwindle quickly under the pressure of 2 New York lives. Then, the final catastrophic mistake occurred. Gabriel was working on a large project, a commission for a major graphic novel publisher. His big break. He needed a significant sum of money, $10,000, to buy high-end digital equipment, rent a temporary workspace, and cover living expenses while he finished the 6-month, non-stop project. He didn't ask me directly. He was too proud. But I saw the anxiety in his green eyes, the stress lines on his forehead. I, Evelyn Reed, the solution-oriented executive, immediately found a solution. My former bank had issued me a corporate credit card for emergency business expenses, the one I used for client dinners and last-minute travel. I was supposed to return it immediately upon resignation. In my haste and emotional fog, I hadn't. One rainy Friday night, after Gabriel had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from trying to make the numbers work on paper, I sat at his desk. My hands were shaking. I told myself this was an investment. I told myself this was for our future. I used the corporate card to purchase the entire $10,000 worth of equipment and software needed for his commission, shipping it all directly to his studio address. The rational Evelyn was screaming, this wasn't a mistake. It was fraud, a clear intentional misuse of company property. But the new Evelyn, the desperate, love-drunk woman, justified it as a necessary evil. I had sacrificed my true happiness once for the bank. Now I was sacrificing the bank's money for my happiness. I thought I had bought us freedom. Instead, I had just bought us a timer, a very loud, very public timer that was set to explode. The $10,000 purchase was the line I should never have crossed. As a vice president of legal affairs, I knew the rules. I wrote the protocols. I knew, intimately, the devastating consequences of corporate fraud. No matter how small the amount seemed in the grand scheme of a multi-billion-dollar institution, but the desperation to keep my newfound peace with Gabriel, to preserve that fragile illusion of freedom, had completely blinded me. I convinced myself the bank wouldn't notice. After all, what was $10,000 to them? A rounding error. I was wrong. In the world of high finance, Every penny is accounted for, not because of its value, but because of the principle of control. The collision wasn't slow. Like my professional unraveling, it was instantaneous and violent. It happened 2 weeks after the purchase. Gabriel was finally diving into his big graphic novel commission, using the sleek, expensive equipment I had financed. I was sitting in a park nearby, finally enjoying a non-billable hour of sunlight, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was Manhattan. Evelyn Reed, a crisp, authoritative female voice. This is Detective Anna Morales from the NYPD's Major Fraud Unit. We need you to come downtown for a voluntary interview regarding the unauthorized use of a corporate asset belonging to Sterling Dunn Bank. The world tilted. The sunlight felt instantly cold. My corporate training, dormant for weeks, snapped back instantly. Do not speak. Ask for counsel. I need to speak to my attorney, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and unnatural. That's advisable, Ms. Reed, the detective replied, her tone completely devoid of emotion. We'll be serving the warrant at your residence shortly. I suggest you decide where you want this conversation to take place. I hung up, my hands shaking so violently, I almost dropped the phone. They knew. They had tracked the corporate card, cross-referenced the delivery address, and knew exactly where I had sent the equipment. And the delivery address was Gabriel's studio. The gravity of what I had done, the sheer, reckless stupidity of using my former employer's money for my lover's professional gain, hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I hadn't just committed fraud. I had dragged the one person I cared about into my self-sabotage. I rushed to Gabriel's studio. He was sitting there, headphones on, absorbed in his work. The new monitor glowed brightly, a beacon of my crime. Gabriel, stop, I said, my voice hoarse. We have a problem, a huge problem. I told him everything. The corporate card, the fraud, the $10,000, and the imminent police involvement. I watched his face as my confession unfolded. Not shock, not anger, but a slow, cold withdrawal. You used your works card, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Evelyn, you're a lawyer. You know what that means. I did it for us, I pleaded, reaching out for his hand. To buy you the time and the tools to get free. I was trying to fix things. He pulled his hand away. You didn't fix things, Evelyn. You bought a lie. You took your corporate disease, the inability to trust in anything but money, and you infected my life with it. I told you, I needed freedom, not an expensive bribe. Then came the final, brutal twist, the ultimate lesson in the difference between James's genuine love and Gabriel's precarious ego. I need you to leave, Gabriel said, standing up. He looked utterly terrified. I cannot have the police come here. This commission is everything. This is my only shot. You have to take the equipment and go. I looked at him, the man who saw my silence, the artist who claimed to value freedom over finance. He was now sacrificing me, his supposed muse, to save his $10,000 equipment and his career. His love, his freedom, his whole existence was conditional. I was betrayed, but in a strange, terrible way. I was also educated. James's love was sacrificed to my ambition. Gabriel's affection was sacrificed to his own ambition. The theme was tragically consistent. In the pursuit of success, connection is always the collateral damage. I was arrested later that afternoon in my own luxurious apartment. The polished steel of the handcuffs felt strangely familiar, like the cold steel of the desk I had chained myself to for 10 years. Detective Morales, efficient and relentless, read me my rights. The legal process was a blur of irony. I, the corporate lawyer, was now sitting across the table from a public defender. I was facing charges of grand larceny and corporate fraud. My high-powered, high-cost career had led me directly to the cheapest, Most desperate kind of legal trouble. My parents were devastated. They had immigrated and worked their lives to keep me out of trouble, out of the shadows. And here I was, having thrown away their sacrifice for a fleeting, reckless love. The shame I felt was heavier than any prison sentence. The bank, led by Michael, naturally pressed charges. They wanted to make an example of me, not because of the $10,000, but to send a clear message to all other executives. Loyalty is non-negotiable. Personal drama will be crushed. My only saving grace came ironically from the system I had mastered. My public defender, a smart, overworked woman, managed to negotiate a plea deal. Full restitution of the funds, probation, and a permanent block on practicing law in New York. The bank got their money and their public display of dominance. I got my freedom, but at the cost of my entire professional identity. 2 years have passed since the sentencing. I am 37 now. I no longer live in Manhattan. The noise, the glass, the height, it all became unbearable. I moved to a small, quiet suburb in New Jersey, a place where people actually know their neighbors and talk about things other than stock options and mergers. I found a job, the simple, humble life I once scorned. I'm working as a legal assistant for a non-profit organization that helps women and children escape abusive situations. The pay is minimal, the hours are standard, and my boss is a kind, perpetually exhausted woman who judges people only by their empathy, not their net worth. I sit here, looking at the small, overgrown garden outside my rented home. I don't wear suits. I wear comfortable, simple clothes. I bake cookies sometimes. The simple, domestic dream 10-year-old Evelyn had. I have no title, no fame, and no wealth. I lost the love of James because I prioritized success. I lost my career because I recklessly chased the illusion of love with Gabriel. I spent 10 years building a magnificent tower of achievement, only to burn it down in a desperate, foolish attempt to feel human again. But in the quiet life, I found one thing the 45th floor could never give me: authenticity. I am no longer Evelyn Reed, VP of Legal Affairs. I am just Evelyn, the woman who learned that the pursuit of money only costs you money. The pursuit of happiness can cost you everything. And sometimes, you have to lose absolutely everything to finally figure out who you are supposed to be. The scars of that gilded cage remain. But now, when I look out the window, I don't see the Statue of Liberty mocking me from afar. I see a small garden, a simple life, and a quiet moment that finally belongs entirely to me, and that, I realize, is a view worth fighting for.